to suggest that we offer a better model. I'm sure that beneath those platitudes are a whole range of considerations which require us to assess more closely what are the immediate challenges we're faced with when determining foreign policy. Now, what are the prospects for India as a voice of the global south in the world between orders? There is considerable potential in this regard, and there is a history of South-South cooperation. Of course, much of it, also goes back to the earlier government. If you think about Manmohan Singh and his contribution in the early years, even in the 80s, to South-South cooperation, I think it paved the way for recognizing that states in the global south needed to cooperate on expertise in various areas. For instance, even think about international legal expertise when states sign on to treaties and agreements. Very often there is a need for that kind of expertise if you want to protect your interests while signing on to a document which involves various international obligations. And there, I think the felt need was that expertise had to be developed within the global south itself in order to accompany or make possible that particular reading. Now, with regard to the global south, there are two readings possible. One is a more cynical reading, which is to say that it just makes good common sense to cultivate the global south, because diplomacy is, after all, about making new friends and building on old relationships. Our relationship with the global south has been an old one, and if you think about even continents like Africa, they have been historic ties, and there's no reason why we should at all lose out on these historic ties. Other is a more affective solidarity based project on the global south. So if you actually look at Vijay Prasad's work, a particular book called A Darker History of Nations, he traces the early, not just a matter of transactional relations between countries within the global south, but there was a recognition that they had shared histories in some sense. Many of them were post-colonial states that had gone through a certain trajectory of colonization and subsequent decolonization, and therefore they had to strike common cause, because very often they were disadvantaged both historically and economically in the wider international system. So that's a particular reading of the global south and a particular reading of solidarity within the global south. And I think that's one model which seems to have at least found its way in the past. Today we are not really sure about which of these models. At this point it's not clear, but I think clearly there's a move the invocation of the category of the global south seems much more visible again today, and particularly in the context of the G20, I think you hear much more about the global south now than you did in the past. Now, the fifth question was, how can India make global politics receptive to its national interests? Is India's domestic policy a hindrance to its global ambitions? So to keep adversaries at bay, to win more allies, and to get on with the business of consolidating our economic growth with positive spillovers for basic sectors, I think would become important. So education, public health, housing, these concerns are going to be still very critical in terms of how we fare domestically. On a meta plane, you could argue that our domestic policy aspirations are not incongruous with our international aspirations. We wish to have a larger global footprint. However, there's always room for improvement on all these counts. So first, to strengthen our commitments to constitutionalism as a way of life, to guard against any backsliding in terms of our institutions and their autonomy, to protect our diversity commitments, not merely vis-a-vis religious minorities, but other minorities as well, to contribute to global burden sharing in terms of both ideas and resources. All of these would be important ingredients for us in order to achieve and to ensure that our footprint in the world is taken seriously by actors outside of home. At a time when the sixth and final question which was posed to me is, at a time when the balance of power is shifting rapidly and almost all great powers are revisionist, what can be the possible India way in an uncertain world? So one of the elements here, I think, which is important to remember or recall is that we must avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to be clear about the values we cherish both domestically and internationally. And notwithstanding any rhetoric, India and Indians shall be judged by our actions both at home and overseas. Okay, how am I doing in time? I'll just take 5 more minutes. So this brings me to the last section in my